today I am joined by the wonderful Dana Gillespie, one of the UK's most prolific singer-songwriters. Dana has released over 70 albums. I think 74, Dana, if I'm correct.
That's
Delving into folk, psychedelic pop, blues, and you're affectionately known as the Queen of Blues. Dana has just released her fantastic new single, Spent the Day in Bed, a cover of the Morrisey number, which is set to feature on her upcoming album, First Love. Thank you so much for joining me, Dana. It's a bank holiday. I'm sure you've got plenty of things to be up to. So it's
well,
nice.
actually, it's pleasantly quiet for today. So you're probably the high spot of my day. The rest of the day, I'm just kind of pottering about. I start gigs again on Friday, so I've got a few days off. But yes, a lot of promotion has to be done on the single and the album, which comes out at the end of this month. Because, as you said, I'm normally known for blues, but this is not blues. It's produced by Marc, Almond, and Triss Penna. So they chose 2/3 of the songs, and I chose the last third. And it's very different to what I normally do. But I'm really, really, really pleased with it. It's turned out great. I never would have thought of doing a Morrissey song, but then the lyrics of the Morrissey song is "Don't stop watching the news." Well, how I agree with that. The news is so ghastly at the moment, nobody should switch it on. And it never seems to get any better. I'd like a station with a good news station. So, and it's got a Lana Del Rey song, which have you heard the
I've
album?
not heard the album, but I was reading through the track list and there's some really interesting choices. And Gods and Monsters is a phenomenal track. So I'm so excited to hear your spin on that.
Well, Mark Almond found that. Of course, it probably won't be played on morning breakfast shows because there's a swear word in it in a couple of places, which I guess is, she's Lana Del Rey is much younger than me, comes from California, and that's how life is over there. But when I grew up in the 60s as a songwriter, you definitely didn't put a swear word in, otherwise you'd never get your music played. But for later night, probably it's pretty cool. It's a lovely song. And also Mark Almond wrote a song which he's never actually released as a on
Okay.
anything as far as I know. It's called Brewer Street Blues, and that's pretty good because he and I also know Soho so well. The what was the kind of the fun area of London. It's all been kind of homogenized and cleaned out now. But when I was growing up, it was the red light district. There were people hanging out of windows. I, as a 13-year-old, and this was in 1962, I used to go to the Marquee Club all the time. We didn't have stabbings. Nobody bothered with passports. Not many people had them, actually. Life was just so much nicer. And of course, there was no internet.
Yeah.
So you just kind of, there are no mobile telephones, and yet you still made appointments. Everything worked.
Yeah.
So that's to do with the kind of the old days. And another of my favorite, well, there's a Dylan song on it as well, but I don't know, do you want to ask? Well, you haven't heard it, so you can't ask me about anything yet.
Well, I would really love to know about the kind of the thought that went into the choices. And I know you said Mark and Triss brought you a lot of the tracks. Were there
Yeah.
any you thought, no, this is not really for me?
Well, we did try a Burt Bacharach and Tim Rice song, and it wasn't that it wasn't for me, it just didn't fit with the rest of the songs. Then we tried a Donovan song because Triss Penna, who's produced many people, but he's one of Mark Armand's best and oldest mates, um, they thought it'd be nice to have songs that had something to do with various men I've known in my life in various different forms. And actually, one has to read my memoirs to know what I'm talking about there, which, by the way, is called "Weren't Born a Man." And I mean, Triss said do a Bowie song. Well, I never would have thought of doing a Bowie song because I have only ever done the song that he actually wrote for me, which is Andy Warhol. And that was on my album that came out in 1973, also called Weren't Born a Man. And if you listen carefully, you can hear Bowie's backing. He's my backing girl singer for the day, and he played guitar, a 12-string guitar on it. So I reciprocated and became his backing girl singer on the Ziggy Stardust album. So, he was part of my life from 1963 when I first met him when I was 14 or 15. And So there's a Dylan song because I met him also in 1965 and I was his supporting act in 1997. So he's been part of my life. Marc Almond is a kind of relatively new friend in my life, maybe from the last 10 years. Let me see give me some tracks. I can't remember.
He's
Tell me.
got Green Day on there, Boulevard of Broken Dreams.
Yeah, that's actually a song I chose.
Yeah.
Only because, well, it was a huge hit for them everywhere, but 20 years ago. But if you listen to the lyrics, they're quite good. I like lyrics. I listen to words, so I find it very important that you can actually understand the words on a recording, which you can't always, but I make it crystal clear. And my age, which is now 75, I'm not afraid to admit it. And I love getting older, by the way, creaks and aches and pains, but the voice still it gets better every year.
Yeah.
As long as that works, then I'll carry on singing. But in a way, when I look back and reflect on my life, I have walked alone, which is the theme of the song, as I'm walking alone down the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And I am alone in one sense that when music is your master, your passion, your joy, everything else is kind of takes second place. So in effect, you are alone. But then in another sense, you're never alone because if you're lucky, I've got an inner voice that guides me, which is really good. I don't want to get too sort of philosophical about it, but I listen to my own conscience and my conscience doesn't let me down. And I walk alone because of the fact that I'm up there making music. Okay, I'm with my band and everything, but you're still alone. And I was always brought up by my father, who said, never forget you're born alone and you die alone. And in between, you fool yourselves, which is true.
Yeah, it is. It does. It resonates. And a really interesting one as well was "Dance Me to the End of Love," the Leonard Cohen track.
Yeah, why? Well, did you know the song anyway?
I did. That was sort of his last sort of posthumous album, wasn't it? "Dance Me to the End of Love" featured on that.
Well, I didn't know that. Again, this was chosen by Marc Almond, and on the album we sing it as a duet, and it's actually got lovely words. Now, I haven't sung a Leonard Cohen song since 1965, when I used to go out and sing his song "Suzanne Takes Me Down to the River," a lovely song. But when I went out as a folk singer, I started out as a folknik with a guitar slung around my neck. But to sing it with Marc was particularly nice because I don't think I haven't done a duet ever. So this is my first duet, and it might as well be with Marc Almond,
Yeah,
and it might as well
what
be
a
a
person to
Leonard
duet
Cohen
with.
song. Yeah, Leonard Cohen wrote some great songs anyway.
So you mentioned briefly there about your kind of your start in the music world as a folk singer.
Mhm.
And it really surprised me to read that your first album was unreleased in the UK, Foolish Seasons, until Record Store Day. What was the story? Why was that unreleased here?
Well, who knows? The head of Decca is long dead, a man called Dick Rowe, and he's famous for having turned down the Beatles. So I don't know. It was released in America. The album cover is great. It did very well on Record Store Day, and I think they're re-releasing it next year, but making the vinyl colored, which is people are into that now. But it was released it says 1967 or something, but I mean I remember being 16, maximum 17 when I recorded it, probably 16. No, maybe 16 was when I was doing singles. The dream of every singer was always to have an LP contract. I'd done quite a few singles on Pie Records, and then suddenly Decca said, yeah. So Foolish Seasons has only a couple of songs written by me. Most of them, well, I'd chosen quite a lot of them. There's an interesting song on there called Dead, which is all about slashing your wrists, which is unusual for a 16-year-old to want to sing that. But I really like the groove of that song. And of course, in those days, the record company boss would always try and get his producer the producer would try and put some of his songs on, obviously, because if it's a hit, then you get more royalties. So I sang some songs by other people, but Decca were extremely kind and nice and let me do my next album, which was called Box of Surprises. And they were all my own songs. And Triss Penna reminded me the other day that, in fact, there are no singers alive even that ever did albums of their own compositions in the 60s. There was a girl called Twinkle who had a hit with a song called Terry about a motorbike crash with her boyfriend. She wrote that herself, but actually LP artists, you know, I come from the era of, let's say, Lulu, Sandy Shaw, Dusty Springfield, those people, they never wrote their own songs. So I was a bit different to all the others, and they were all dressed in nice little dresses, and I was always in a pair of jeans bursting out of a shirt because I was never a flat-chested woman. And I learnt from an early age that if you opened the top button, then the photographer for, let's say, the Daily Mirror would work harder to get it in the newspapers. I mean, nowadays you've got to be nearly naked, but
Well, that's
I'm
true.
talking the 60s, how life has changed.
Well, that actually brings me on to my next question, because obviously the 60s, as someone that was born in the early 90s, it's got a sort of romanticized image for me of the glamour, the music, the culture. It's in London and Soho. There's a real magic to that image. What do you think the generations of today could learn from the 60s?
Well, they should learn to be sorry that they missed it, because it was a time of innocence as well. You know, the pill had been invented quite early, you know, just around that time. There was freedom. The war was over by a few years. The music scene was small, so that you got to know everyone. If I, you know, I mean, always went to school, although I left school at 15 because I was already singing, but I made sure that I went to great blues clubs and music clubs, and, you know, which I don't think you'd be able to do that now. Now you have to, I think, stay at school till you're 16, but I got out just before the law changed. I think because the music scene was smaller, people knew each other and they were very friendly. And I don't think most of the musicians that I knew in those days, they didn't go into the business for the money. They went in because nobody thought you could make any money. There's the famous quote from Mick Jagger. He was asked, "What are you going to be doing in 3 years' time?" And this is in the 60s. He said, "I'll probably have to just get a normal job." You know, to even think of going to America was an unheard of territory. We used to have to wait till the odd record companies record stores would bring in imports so you could hear American music. Nowadays, of course, people seem to be wanting to be a celebrity or a star. How pathetic is that, in my view? In the old days, you didn't stardom didn't come into it. You did it because you loved music, and nobody went in for surgical enhancements. Nobody wanted to be a megastar because there wasn't outlets to be kind of celebrities. The idea of being a celebrity just to be a celebrity, I think, is pathetic. To
Right.
say you want to be a celebrity so you can do your music, that's a little bit different. But just to be known for being known, what
Yeah.
on earth for?
Meaningless. Yeah.
But that this is how the times have changed, you know. And you know, when I grew up, there were there was one channel on the television, and a lot of it was in black. Well, it was in black and white. I'm talking about the sort of 50s. But so now we're spoilt for choice. Any twit can make a record. It doesn't matter if they can sing in tune or not, because you've got all the machinery to turn them in tune. And so it's lost a lot of heart and soul,
Yeah.
which is, you know, which is why when I go into clubs, and I often go to, a friend of mine is the boss of a club in London here called the Temple of Art and Music, and he says the most successful nights when he's just playing kind of music, well, I nearly said the word disco music, which would actually really date me, but he says the young kids, they all want 80s, they want 70s, they want 60s music. They're not really interested in listening to what's happening now. And it's quite difficult to sing along to Taylor Swift, although I'm full of admiration for her. You know, I could almost say I might even be a Swiftie because she's done phenomenally well. But the fact is, the old songs people will remember. It's quite hard to sing to some sort of techno thing that has no soul.
Speaking of soul, you know, your relationship with David Bowie obviously led to the Weren't Born a Man album. And you know that one of your kind of, I'd say it's a cult album, really, isn't it? It's got a real intense fan following, and Ain't Gonna Play Second No Second Fiddle as well was another one that kind of built that cult following from Main Man Recordings. Um, do you look back on that period with a fondness? I know obviously it led to you kind of being stuck in contract hell for sort of 10 years or so. But do you still kind of admire these records and look back on these two in particular?
Well, the contract hell was actually only from 75 for about 4 years. It wasn't as bad as that because I couldn't record to anyone else until Main Man and Bowie had sorted out their litigation. And I was caught up because I had the same contract, actually. No, I look back on it was great times, it was fabulous times. It was from 1970, I met Bowie in the 60s and when he was still David Jones, and he always said, we really need a good manager. And he found this guy, Tony DeFries, who was incredible. We had a ball. By this time, Bowie was married to Angie, who really, really promoted him and looked after him in the early years, as did Main Man. And Tony DeFries said all of us should have a personal assistant. We had 24/7 limos. We were flying everywhere, first class, not just business class, but first class. I can tell you it was fabulous. And when a manager says to you, and I'd already had about 10 managers before them, and so did Bowie, but we really found the right one until the House of Cards started to fall to pieces. But when somebody says to you, look, you can have whichever musician you want to work with, you can have whatever studios, here's your personal assistant, all bills were taken care of, we didn't have to put our hands in our pockets for anything. It all started to go wrong. Well, for many reasons, and actually probably people should read my memoirs. I don't want to sort of bore you with the negative side of things, but I had a great time. I got a chance to live in New York for nearly 2 years while I was kind of commuting between London and America. And I had, I was the first Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar. So I was still signed to Main Man then. So when we did the recordings of Andy Warhol, Bowie, who he wasn't sure about the song, but he liked my version so much that he then went into the studios and re-recorded his version. And I think it came out before mine on the Hunky Dory album. But mine was the first version. And he openly acknowledged that he'd written it for me on the famous John Peel show. So they were great, great times. I got to hang out with marvelous musicians. We had a ball. And I don't look back on any bad things that have happened in my life with any bad feelings, because through kind of difficult times is when you grow. And I always knew that Main Man couldn't last forever. I mean, the finances were just not adding up. Not that I was thinking about that then, because we were all, and it wasn't just me and Bowie. Our manager, Tony DeFries, then was doing stuff with Iggy Pop. We had Mick Ronson, who was the kind of, had been Bowie's side man, where actually he was always a star, but he wasn't a front man. They tried to make him a front man and it didn't kind of work out. So yeah, I had great times. They're golden memories. So the first 5 years of the 1970s were glory hallelujah. Bring them on. I'd do it again if somebody came along and said, you can have everything paid for and, life will be different.
I know you mentioned disco and you said it was a phrase that would date you. And so many singer-songwriters did move into the disco world in the 70s. Was there ever any pressure or inclination from yourself that you thought, you know what, I'm going to explore this, or was it just not for you?
Well, I love exploring new things. I mean, I did do a song in the 80s called Did He Fall or Was He Pushed? And it is very 70s disco. When I look at the hairstyle, it's sort of mullets and everything is really dated. But, I'm so well documented from the 60s. There are things that you go, God, I did that. But, you did that because that was what was in those days. And I've done some techno numbers. I mean, in 1983, I had a #1 hit across Europe, which was never sadly released in England. And it was all sampled synthesizer stuff because there's a lot of Indian sounds. I'm mad about Indian music, always have been. And the only way to capture sitar sounding things in those days was to sample it. We didn't have tabla players sitting around, or if we did, I wouldn't have known where to find them. I've since made 10 albums in Sanskrit, so I know Indian music much better. But, I have done techno, and I actually did a couple of months ago in March, in fact, I refined a song that had been started by AI.
Yeah.
And they'd asked me to go and if I would sing it. But when you hear AI music, they haven't got the phrasing sorted yet. And it was obviously an AI voice. So the phrasing was odd, and some of the words they used was odd. So I refined this song, which is called The Last Polar Bear, and it was entered into Eurovision, but it was entered into, this is for this year. Sadly, it didn't get past the first round. We came number 7 out of 17. And you know, I stood alone on the stage in just singing The Last Polar Bear about the fact that we haven't got any polar bears or running out of them. Whereas if you're the ones that won it, and it came in through the door of San Marino, people don't know how you get into, well, England is weird. They just choose a song these days. But San Marino is a tiny principality in Italy, and they don't have enough musicians, but they have an entrance into Eurovision. So they put me in, and I was the one that won it, which will go into, I think the semi-finals is on tomorrow. They were sort of a 7 or 8 piece, loads of tattoos and bright pink hair and, you know, spandexy type of outfits. And I mean, I'm just in a pair of black jeans and a black top that I bought in a charity shop for £5, surrounded with a backdrop of polar bears. So I was definitely, you know, I thought the message was very good, and I'm very proud that I did it. So I don't mind working with AI. I'm not, it's not off the limit for me.
It was, I sat and watched it live, Dana, and for 4 hours watched through
Mad thing.
all these performances in a Voce per Semerino, and oh, sorry, I think I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I lost you. You said you watched it, and you mad fool to stay up for 4 hours
Well,
in Italian.
I am a Eurovision fan, and I was so rooting for, a Brit in San Marino, and I thought the sentiment behind the track was really quite powerful, and um, as you say, the staging stood out. It was very subtle. It was yourself on stage, and just delivering this humanity in a song that was AI generated. So quite an interesting um, experiment, I suppose.
Yeah, but there were 3 judges there. 2 were Italian. They voted well for me. And there was one British judge. I never discovered his name, but if I do find him, I'll throttle him because he gave me nil point. And he should have supported his own country. But anyway, the ones that did win, it was a group called Megara. So I guess they're on the semi-finals. I guess, when is it, tomorrow night? I am actually also a fan of Eurovision, which is unusual for a blues singer. One is meant to be very puristic and blues, but I've come through many genres of music in my long years and 60 years in the business. And actually, I once did years ago, it must have been in the early 80s, the English lyrics for an Austrian entrant in Eurovision. They were called Duo Mess, duo as the name. Mess is a dreadful name, but anyway, they wanted English lyrics, so I wrote that. So I have always kind of looked at Eurovision, and I will be performing on the night of Eurovision on the May the 11th at the Temple of Art and Music, and I will sing Polar Bear with pride because it's a good song.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we need to also, you mentioned your memoirs, and I often think of artists writing memoirs must be quite a cathartic experience in some senses because you're reliving the good and the bad. Can you sum up the experience of sitting down to write these memoirs, Born a Man?
Well, I'm somebody that's I'm what one calls in French a raconteuse. I'm good at telling stories. So at dinner parties or whatever, not that anyone gives them any longer, or if they do, I'm not invited. But, when I'm in with people, I know how to tell really good stories. And for years, people said, you must write your book, you must write your memoirs. So about 8 years ago, I did sit down and just typed away and got it finished. And I've got a really good friend in Julian Clary, if you know who I mean. And I've known him since he was 13, and he's had a few books out. So I said to him, who can I go to? And he gave me some tips on getting it to a publisher. But they kept saying, yeah, well, we like the book, but we don't know. And so 8 years ago, I started with this. I found it quite easy to write what isn't easy for me is the dates and things with numbers and the chronological order. So at the end of the 8 years, I finally found somebody, a guy called David Shusher, who sort of put some of the dates and the facts in right. So he's what on the book as my co-author, but the stories have to come from me because I was there and he wasn't. It made it easier because he was a Bowie fan. But unfortunately, when the book finally we got it together, book came out and COVID hit. So there weren't any bookstores. So it can only, up until now, it can only be bought online from Amazon or whatever. The thing that's special about it is that there's loads of Polaroids in it, which I took. And if you're a Bowie fan, there's pictures of Bowie that nobody else will ever have seen or known. And it's been into its second pressing, and it's being relaunched on the 4th of July at the Temple of Art and Music. So I'm quite pleased about that. But I mean, some people during COVID, I spoke it. So I'm on Audible.
Yeah.
So if people don't want to read, but you won't get the nice pictures, unfortunately, on Audible.
We'll put a link in so people can order the book.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
Or it's from a company called Hawksmoor.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that would be very kind of you, yes.
I know obviously you have also dabbled in the world of film and some really incredible filmmakers, some of my favorites, Ken Russell, Nick Roeg, that you have worked with.
Yeah.
But I've also seen it written that you said that film just wasn't your passion. Did you still appreciate working with these filmmakers, even though maybe acting wasn't your number one passion?
Well, my number one passion is obviously music, and mostly, I mean, you mentioned Nick Roeg and Ken Russell. These are kind of well-respected people, but don't forget I had my couple of stints of being in chamois leather and loads of cleavage, running around exploding volcanoes on people that time forgot, and the Lost Continent. I love to do anything that's fun, and but I'm out there singing, but if somebody came along and offered me today be in a film with a load of cleavage and a chamois leather, I would say yes, because it is just kind of fun. The Nick Roeg one was called Bad Timing, and sadly so much landed up on the cutting room floor. I kind of forget that I worked with him, but yes, so that was nice. And the Ken Russell film was Marla. With Robert Powell playing Marla, and I played Marla's mistress, and I even got to write some music for the film. So that was it's nice, but acting is not like music. Music lifts you up and makes you feel great. Acting means sitting around for hours, eating weird food on location. And I don't regret it, but I realized I had a very good lesson when I auditioned. This was when I was still with Main Man. I went to audition for the National Theatre for The Tempest. I auditioned for Sir Peter Hall, of which Sir John Gielgud played Tempest, and Jenny Agutter was in it. Really good people. And Peter Hall handed me Shakespeare and said, "Now read this. This is what we're considering you for the part." And I read it, and actually, quite frankly, I was pretty awful. And I said to him, I didn't do that very well. And he said, "No," he said, "but why don't you now sing it? Just invent a melody." The moment I sang it, I was brilliant and I got the part. So he changed my bit, and it was me and a girl singer called Julie Covington, as in Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. And we shared a dressing room with Jenny Agutter. So I sang my way through Shakespeare. So it really proved to me that music moves me and straight acting doesn't. But if somebody offered me a part, I would probably say yes if I thought I could do it justice. But, at my age, they're not going to offer me. I knew I was never going to be Lady Macbeth. I don't look the part, but I look perfect for doing Mary Magdalene.
We need the remake of The People That Time Forgot. Well,
it's shown. Somebody said it was showing yesterday on something called Channel 41, which I've never heard of. It gets shown quite a lot. So it's me with a guy called Doug McClure, the Virginian. And it's if you like those kind of fantasy films, before computer generated stuff came in and made things unrealistic.
Yeah, it was a feature of my childhood. I remember watching that with my dad. Yeah.
Shame on you both.
But no, they have a certain charm to them. They
Yeah,
do. They do.
do. You know, I know that when I was fighting a man in a pterodactyl or a diplodocus, looked like it, there's a man inside pulling the levers to make the whole thing look realistic, and you're hitting them with a bit of rubber or something so as not to break the plastic shell that he's sitting inside. Gone are those days. Nobody makes those kind of films anymore. Shame.
One last thing I would love to ask you about is your music festival on Mustique, and that's been going for a long time now. And I just want to kind of find out a little bit about how that started and why Mustique, and a little bit about the history behind the festival.
Well, I went to Mustique for the first time in 1970 with my mother and stepfather, and he'd broken his hip, and he was told if you swim in the Caribbean Sea, you'll everything will heal up better. So I went out with my parents then, and I loved the island. In those days, it was very wild. There was only a few houses there, and the electricity didn't really work. And so I used to keep going back. And the guy that runs Basil's bar, um, his name is Basil, understandably. You know, one night we were talking, and I said, you know, I sing blues. You love the blues. Why don't we start a festival? And it would only work really if it's a charity, because he has a charity over there for which he got an OBE and got invited to William and Kate's wedding because of it. Because of course the royals have always had a connection, much more in the past than now, actually, on the island. And so with the whole thing is my job was to find musicians who'd go and live for 15 days in a 5-star plus luxury, everything paid for, but no money in January when the weather is awful in Britain. So I made an album of it every year. And Mick Jagger, of course, has a house, several houses over there. So I can actually say that I produced some tracks with Mick Jagger on it, because we made an album. The albums were for sale to promote the charity, but after 20 years, they wanted a bit of a change. So I stepped back. They didn't want to make the albums anymore, and that's what I loved, was to make the albums. So this and doing good. Okay, it's a bit of a fantasy island, and yes, it does have kind of stars go out there because the privacy is extraordinary. I knew it when it was wild, the island, and you had to walk everywhere. There were no cars, but now people drive in air-conditioned cars. There were, you know, which is madness. You're in the West Indies, open windows for goodness sake. And now all the houses are manicured and perfect, and everyone's got a gardener and a cook and it's totally unreal. It's sort of fun if you don't have to pay the bill. I'm told that it costs £100,000 just every year just to keep your house open. But if you're like Mick Jagger or whatever, you've got your house there, you might as well spend it on something that you like. You can't take it with you.
Well, Dana, I won't keep you too long, but it's honestly been fascinating. You are a raconteur. I could listen to you for hours. And as a fan, this has been a real pleasure for me to just sit and spend 30 minutes talking to you and hearing these incredible stories. So I really appreciate you for passing that time on.
I'm just sad that you're not going to be in Edinburgh when I'm doing the Voodoo Rooms on the 6th of July. I don't get a chance to get to Edinburgh, but
I know,
I am with the London Blues Band. But you're not.
I'm not. I'll be in Rhodes, but next time you kind of you make it up to Scotland, I'll make an appearance.
All right.
But yes, thank you very much. I'll put in links for the album and for the
Okay.
book, and yeah, can't wait to hear it in full.
Well, I hope the record company sends you the actual album. You've only got the single, yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll tell them to send it to you now.
Thank you
Well,
very
I'll
much.
write them an email.
Lovely.
Okay, great to speak to you. Have
Thanks, Dana.
a fun day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.